now I will introduce Sherry, but before I do that, there's just a couple instructions. And first, I want to congratulate most of you because you already have muted your audio, and please mute your video as well, because it is easier for our reception if you do that. And also, if you look at the top right-hand corner of your screen, and there's the word view, and under that, select speaker view. And that works a little bit better for seeing the program. And if you have questions, and please write them in the chat box, and they will be handled after the presentation. And now Sherry Johnson, member of our committee, will introduce our speaker. You're muted.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. At Tuesday Open House, I've heard lots of really good presentations. Now, you may wonder how it came to be that we have Dave here today. Well, back in March of 2020, when I couldn't sleep, I listened to a podcast. I went to a podcast of Rick Steves, and I was scrolling through, and kayaking in Norway caught my attention. So I listened, and I thought, I've got to learn more about this guy. So I went to his website, saw the video coming home, and I thought, we need to have him at Mindercirken. Unfortunately, it didn't happen in-house, but we've got him here today, all the way from Edmonds, Washington, 2 hours earlier. And so I think it's a great fit for us. Dave is an adventurer, an author, and a speaker. He's kayaked all over the world, and Norway, the Mississippi River, the Erie Canal. He's a Lutheran pastor. He's a master gardener. He graduated from Luther College. He's a runner, and he's also a husband and a father of 5. So I'm just really excited to hear this program, and I know you will enjoy it too. So Dave, it's your program.
Well, I'll just say a quick word. Can you all hear me? I assume you can. You're going to have an opportunity to see a film that I produced during my Norway paddle adventure to my ancestral Sogna and Hardanger fjords. And I will be available for question and answer time after the film is shown. And I look forward to hearing your questions. And I'm just going to do an unsolicited ad. If you want more details of this adventure, I've written a book. All of my books are Paddle Pilgrim. That's the title. And this one is Kayaking the Fjords of Norway. And I think my website, paddle-pilgrim.com, will be put in the chat section, so you can check about this book and other books if you want more details. So I'll leave it at that, and I look forward to the Q&A afterwards, after the film has been shown.
Sometimes we need to go on a journey to find our home. We are all on a journey to find out who we are and where we came from. Something was drawing me to kayak Norway to solve the mystery of my family roots along the fjords, a mystery that started on the old homestead in Iowa. It's called the Driftless. Glaciers from the last ice age missed this region and left behind a landscape of rolling hills and forests and streams. It wasn't like the homeland, but close enough to pause and then stay. This is where my Norwegian relatives settled in the 1850s near Decorah, Iowa. As a boy, when we gathered for family reunions, we had so much fun hiking and paddling and fishing and eating. Uncle Lester knew every good fishing hole in the county and supplied walleye pike for the feasts. And Uncle Hoot, yep, Uncle Hoot, was the storyteller. My favorite tales were about my grandparents, Ole Ellingson and Helen Nessheim. Grandpa Ole juggled a business in town, farms in the countryside, and as county sheriff during Prohibition, kept the peace. Grandma Helen was the quiet matriarch who managed the household, feeding 11 hungry children during the Great Depression and sending them all off to college. Hoot affectionately called them the dear departed because they had each died before I was born. It felt like they were there with us as Hoot spun his yarns. In the 1850s, Ole and Helen's parents left the challenges of farming the rocky hillsides along the fjords of Norway and came to America. They came for a better life. They came for the American dream. What an amazing journey they had gone on across the ocean to come to this place along Canoe Creek. Canoe Creek flows into the upper Iowa River, which meanders into the mighty Mississippi River, where Uncle Lester took us fishing. About this time, I read Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and I began to dream of traveling on a raft down the river someday. That dream came true in 2012 when I launched my kayak from Lake Itasca in northern Minnesota, and for 2 months I paddled 2,300 miles down Big Muddy to New Orleans. What an adventure. I was hooked. As a boy, my family lived along another river, the Hudson, and I was fascinated by the Erie Canal. Once again, my dream became a reality in 2017 when I launched near Niagara Falls and I paddled the Erie Canal and Hudson River to the Statue of Liberty. Something remarkable was happening on these journeys. I found myself imagining my ancestors as they traveled these same waters on their journey to America. What did my great-grandparents leave behind in Norway? And what's it like today along those fjords? It felt like they were calling out to me, "Come to Norway, come and paddle, come and see." And so I began to imagine and plan an adventure in Norway. But rather than paddle solo, I decided to gather a crew of friends. We met up in Minneapolis. Each was a seasoned paddler. Each had Norwegian roots. Each was retired, and each said an enthusiastic "Ja, sure, you betcha" when I invited them to be a part of our Spirit of Norway team. Jim had paddled the Mississippi, climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, and as an engineer is a great detail guy. Ellen was the first woman to solo paddle the Mississippi and is a gifted artist who creates remarkable paintings and drawings. Brent has paddled the Missouri Breaks, does drone videography, and was once a rock and roll drummer. And I am Dave, pastor, professor, paddler, poet, who dreams big dreams and loves adventures. And so we took off. Our grand plan was to paddle for 1 month on my 2 ancestral fjords, 2 weeks on the Sogna or Sun Fjord, and 2 more weeks on the Hardanger Fjord, with our final destination, the Nessheim family farm near Granvin, that my relatives left to come to America over 150 years ago. It was raining when we arrived in Gudvangen. After a damp night in our tents, we were greeted by a cloudy morning. But a paddler arrived to let us know this was the very best weather because you paddle in the clouds and it's magical. The sun soon melted the clouds and we were savoring the rugged beauty of the Nerøy Fjord. We found a spectacular campsite near Dirdal along a rushing stream. Jet-lagged and paddle-weary, we were ready for sleep. About 4 a.m., I awoke in my tent to the roar of the nearby stream, squawking seagulls, and the persistent light of the midnight sun. But it was more than that. My mind was racing, a million thoughts. Why am I doing this? Can I do this? I wondered if my great-grandfather had the same fears when he began his journey to America. What happened next took our breath away. Sunrise on the Sun Fjord. After a day hiking up the glacier-carved valley, we met Bjarne and Randve. I started calling the people who helped us along the way our fjord angels. They invited us to share a snack of heart-shaped waffles. It was time we got back on the water, and the weather was cooperating as we launched. But how could a place of such peace and beauty change so quickly? Soon we were battling headwinds and waves bouncing and ricocheting off the cliffs, 2,000-foot cliffs, and water was seeping into my spray skirt. It was cold, icy water, and I was paddling in circles, and I finally yelled out to Brent, come and check my rudder. So he came over, and he came alongside, and he said, it's broken. So I paddled furiously into a little tiny cove and dried off, and there was a Norwegian couple there, and they said, go rudderless. I thought, of course. My broken rudder was taking me around in circles. And so I returned to the water rudderless, and without a broken wing, I continued to paddle to Undredal and on later to Flom. There's a deeper lesson here. With the help of our next fjord angels, Daniel and Marta and Irvin from Njord Kayaks, we made our way to a campground in an ancient apple orchard. It may be called the Sun Fjord, but the rain and wind persisted the next day. So we toured the tiny village of Flom, and in the evening caught the electric train up into the mountains to Myrdal.
The next stop is the waterfall.
One moment we were cursing the wind and the water and the waves, and the next, all we could say was, wow, as we viewed a wonderland of waterfalls. I told Ellen as we got off the train, I sprained my wow. With a dire forecast of severe weather, our outfitters took us by road and ferry to Balestrand to create a base camp for future paddling. On the way along the fjord that was windswept with white caps, Irvin, our outfitter, warned us about the weather and willowas. Willowas? What is that? Willowas are winds that would sweep down from the mountain valleys into the fjords with such force they could snap the paddle out of your hands and capsize your kayak. We began to wonder, was this journey really a good idea? Our destination, Balestrand, turned out to be a quaint village with a long history as a gathering place for artists, drawn by spectacular scenery, illumined by an almost magical light.
I'm a paddler and I'm an artist, and that's who I truly am. The lighting here is totally different than what I'm used to. It's more subdued, and it's just, there's a richness in the colors here.
During a break in the weather, we enjoyed paddling outside Balestrand on the Fierlands Fjord with farms and villages perched on rocky hillsides. Perfect paddling conditions. The surface was like glass. Our kayaks drifted, and we soaked up the surroundings. But we had learned by now that in Norway you can experience 4 seasons in a day. The rain and a cold wind returned, and so we rented a small cabin in Balestrand. And for several days, we waited. We had a lot of time on our hands waiting for the weather to turn. So we pondered, we studied the maps, we debated our options, we walked, we went to the St. Olaf Kirke, and I said a special prayer for guidance. And we stayed close to shore. The wait was getting frustrating, but it slowly dawned on us. We were on vacation. Unlike our previous journeys, we were not an expedition with goals of many miles to paddle each day. Like those childhood family reunions, our Spirit of Norway goal was fun, enjoyment, savoring the place, the people, and the culture. We had to pause to remember. After several days, the rain stopped, and the most beautiful rainbow promised better paddling ahead. With revised plans, we prepared to finally leave Balestrand and launch again, a 9-mile paddle across the widest stretch of the Sun Fjord. Our spirits were high, and humor had returned as Jim and Brent waited for the tide to come in so we could get going. Jim had forgotten how to paddle, so he had to practice a bit.
Sometimes I have laughed so hard on this trip that the next morning my stomach hurts.
What began with calm water and laughter changed quickly into a white-knuckle experience in the widest part of the fjord. I almost capsized trying to use my GoPro camera. It was like being in a Hans Dahl painting. I tried to summon up the courage of my Viking ancestors, and I thought about my great-grandmother, who was only 17 years old when she sailed to America. Keep paddling, Dave. And save us, St. Olaf. We were relieved to reach the safe and protected harbor in the hamlet of Vik. After drying off and warming up, we were transported back across the mountains to the Nerøy Fjord. The weather forecast was promising, with warmer days and less wind, and we were returning to sheltered waters. A short paddle up the fjord, we found a fabulous campsite. The views were breathtaking. It was unreal.
Right now I'm drawing a sketch of the little hamlet that's across the fjord. Then in the background is the very dramatic lighting of the fjord and the softness of the water in the foreground.
For several days, we enjoyed shorter paddles and hikes as we explored this new home. One afternoon, when we returned to camp after a short paddle, it appeared our home had been invaded by a fleet of kayaks. As we approached, we learned that they were young adults with handicapping conditions, riding in tandem kayaks with guides, their own fjord angels. We were deeply inspired by these exceptional paddlers. Ellen presented Jan, their leader, with one of our Spirit of Norway patches. As we sat around the campfire one evening, Ellen shared how much she loved paddling and camping because she has her home on her back like a turtle. She has all her needs, she's traveling light, she can enjoy and be fully present to the natural world and everything she encounters. It was hard to leave the rugged beauty of the Nerøy Fjord, but it was now time to paddle the Hardanger Fjord, where my ancestors farmed for centuries. We immediately saw very different terrain, with more farms and orchards on the hillsides. The weather was warming, and paddling conditions were improving as the fjord was widening.
An absolutely gorgeous day. Wonderful, wonderful day to be on the water.
Our conversations were growing deeper. We shared what we were learning. We could be honest with our feelings.
It's challenging. It's challenging me in a lot of different ways as far as doing things outside my comfort zone, sleeping in a tent for a month, sleeping bag, but not to take anything away from all of this. It's beautiful here.
We had all been drawn to this place. Norway is a place of fierce and spectacular beauty. It's a beauty that invites and draws you in and begins to shape you. Home is place. Jim first heard about Norway in a 5th grade world geography class. He remembered pictures of fjords with mountains that started at sea level, then stretched and stretched into the heavens. It tugged at his heart. For him, this trip was truly a dream come true. Over and over again, we said, wow, as we paused and beheld the 3 F's: fjord, fjell, fossen, water, mountains, waterfalls. And we were reminded that in all our adventures, it's about the people, the fjord angels, those good folks who welcome us, take care of our needs, and inhabit the place with their customs and history and hospitality. Home is people. And now as we approached Granvin, I was excited to meet my people on the family farm near Nesheim. As we approached the family farm, I felt welcome. The ground, the land, the water, it was just so beautiful, and I felt like literally I had come home. When I called out, "I'm a Nesheim," Erling and Helga immediately invited us with a "Velkommen." And we sat for an hour or two, and it was like I'd come home and I was with family. We immediately began talking, sharing stories, laughing. We gathered on their deck to look in the book of family history. And we found great-grandpa Johannes' name in the list of family members who had gone to America. We had just met, but it felt like I had known them all my life. Ultimately, it's about the spirit of Norway. Home is spirit. What the locals called friluftsliv, or fresh air life. You know, you're indoors, you're outdoors, you're with people, you're celebrating, you're hiking, you're climbing, you're paddling, you're breathing deeply, you are alive. It's what I experienced long ago by the waters of Canoe Creek on the family farm in Iowa. When we are alive, we see angels all around us, a cloud of witnesses. And maybe most of all, we can encounter the ancestors who I never met in person, but who called me and guided me on this journey. Long ago, I wondered if my great-grandparents were ever homesick for Norway. And I wondered what I'd discover when I went to the family farm. I now have some answers. I sat by the fjord one evening and I wrote this letter. Dear Grandma, as I sit beside this natal fjord, I think of great-grandpa Johannes. But most of all, of you, Grandma Helen. I wonder if you ever dreamed of your native land. Even though you were born in America and it became your home, did you wonder what your home was like on the Hardanger Fjord as you put on your native dress, the bunad, and made lefse and rummagrut and krumkake? As I traverse these holy waters, I have come to feel a deep connection with and a care for this place that was once home to my family. In a very profound way, it is becoming home to me. Home is where the heart is. I am home, Grandma, and I wish you were here. Your grandson, Dave.
Thank you. Mga tak.
Well, I've unmuted my my microphone, and I assume that you can all hear me, and I hope you enjoyed the film that I was fortunate to be able to produce with my good friend Mary Peterson, who is a Norwegian as well, and who does a lot of work for the Nordic Museum, the National Nordic Museum here in the Seattle area. And so I'm available to answer any questions, as I used to tell my college students when I taught at Trinity Lutheran College or Pacific Lutheran University. There are no dumb questions. So I welcome any questions. And if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, I will welcome those questions.
Well, my name is Dick Lundgren, and I'm handling the chat, but not too many questions, but we'll start in chat. The first thing is that Kaya has put your website, paddlepilgrim.com, available for anyone who wants to use it. And then there's a good morning greeting from Mary Jo Thorsheim, who also comments and says, beautiful film, thank you. Did you happen to see Hans Dahl's paintings in visiting around Balestrand?
I did indeed. Balestrand was one of our favorite places to spend several days when the weather was a little severe. And I loved his paintings. And as you can see, I included one of them in the film, particularly when we took off from Balestrand and went across to the little village of Vik across the fjord and ran into some pretty severe weather. And I thought that particular picture or that particular painting of Hans Dahl was appropriate. But they looked a lot happier and a lot more comfortable in their larger craft than I was, or I felt, as we headed across in the wind and the waves. But yeah, Hans Dahl is a magnificent artist, and I have a deep love and appreciation for his work.
Okay, I have a question related to that. Were the Huntsdall paintings just in random locations, or was there kind of a museum collection?
Well, there was not a museum, but there are quite a few little art galleries, and I don't know if some of the folks who are a part of this Zoom have been to Balestrand, but there's some wonderful art galleries. And there were several, at least replicas of his paintings in those art galleries. And I think Sherry mentioned that just a fun little Balestrand story related to Rick Steves. I'm sure many of you know of Rick Steves. I can look out my window and I can almost see his house from where I live here in Edmonds. And Rick is a lifelong and very active, not only traveler and writer and speaker, but Lutheran. And so Rick has done several radio interviews with me. And when we were in Balestrand, we had dinner one evening in a little restaurant called the Vikinger Treff. And as we walked into this little restaurant, I saw a little picture of Rick Steves framed and with a little article at the entrance. And so I asked Carola, who was the manager or the owner of the restaurant, what was the reason? And she said, well, before I had my restaurant, I had a little cart that was down on the docks, and she was actually from Austria, and she made a very good Austrian sausage. And Rick Steves brought a travel group through a number of years ago, and they were in a hurry, and Rick had a sausage and loved it. And he wrote about it and has since mentioned it in his travel guides. And that was so helpful, has been so helpful, that Carola was able to, several years after that, open her own restaurant. And so I texted Rick and said, Tusen Tak and Dankeschön from Carola in Balestrand for your advertising. It's helped her business, and we just had a wonderful dinner. So those are the kinds of experiences you often have that you can't plan for, but you're always delighted to have.
Okay, there's a few more comments and questions coming in. One is a comment from Rhonda Grunwald. She says, wow, so beautiful and spiritually uplifting. Thank you so very much. And then there's a comment from Trina Underbart, Tusen Tak, so kozelig. I think that's a common feeling amongst those of us who just watched it.
I'm happy to hear that.
Then a comment from Sue Erickson. Our family hopes to travel to Norway this summer. Erickson family from Vik, Balestrand. Any suggestions on local contact for kayaking that fjord?
Well, if in my book, and there's information on the website, but in my book, I list the two outfitters that we rented kayaks from. Nordic Ventures is located in Gudvangen, which of course is on the Sogne Fjord, the a beautiful, beautiful stretch of the Neroy little finger fjord of the Sun Fjord. So Nordic Ventures, and then in the town of Flom, there's another kayak company that is available, and I encourage folks to look into that possibility. It may seem a little daunting, but you can rent kayaks for an hour or two. You don't have to go out for a long expedition like we did, and to experience the fjords close to the water is wonderful. And they, if you don't have experience, they're happy to outfit you very reasonably and teach you the basics and do it in a very safe way. So between Njord Kayaks in Flom and Nordic Ventures in Gudvangen, you will be well equipped for a paddling adventure.
Okay, another question from comment from Sherry Johnson. And what she says is probably unanimous among us. I loved how you wrote the letter to your grandma. Made my eyes mist over. Oh, the stories we wish our ancestor could tell us. I know I have that exact feeling. What do you think of that?
Yeah. Well, every time, I mean, I haven't looked at the film for a while, but I get misty-eyed every time I see that as well. And as I sat by the fjord, you know, as you all know, I'm a Lutheran pastor, and in Paul's letter to the Hebrews, he talks about, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us therefore run the race that is set before us. And you know, I am a firm believer that cloud of witnesses, alive and dead, encourage us. When I paddled the Mississippi River, I write an essay in there called the Cloud of Witnesses and the Dead Poets Society. And I talk about how I imagined on those miserable days when it was hot and windy and the barges were throwing up big waves on the Mississippi River. I imagined the banks of the Mississippi were like huge bleachers. And I didn't call it the cloud, I called it the crowd of witnesses. And they were cheering me on. And so my grandparents and great grandparents and our ancestors in the faith, I think, are a wonderful resource that we don't really, I mean, I am a firm believer that they are present with us and encouraging us. And I think that's a great resource of the faith.
Okay, I have a spin-off question of my own. When you went from Itasca to the Gulf, I think you said it, but I don't remember how many days that took to do it.
It took 2 months. So
2 months.
it's 2,350 miles. And basically I went from early May until July, and the Lutheran Youth Gathering was taking place in July. So I had to make it by a certain date because I was one of the speakers at that youth gathering, to which 30,000 Lutheran high school youth were attending. So I had to make about 40 miles a day. I had to average that to make it to New Orleans. And I got there actually 3 days before the event began and had all sorts of adventures. And if people go to my website, they can see excerpts and reviews of that paddle pilgrim book. So there's a book about the Mississippi River journey and a short video. There's a book about the Erie Canal and Hudson River to the Statue of Liberty journey. And there, of course, is the Norway adventure. And I'm actually working with a manuscript right now. I went back to the headwaters of the Mississippi this summer with my friends Jim and Ellen that were with me in Norway. That's our favorite stretch from Itasca to Brainerd, the headwaters. And many of you I know have probably walked across the river at Itasca and been in that magnificent area. And so I've written another book. It'll be the 4th Paddle Pilgrim book, and it will be out before Christmas. And we were looking forward to and enjoyed the wildlife and the scenery. But as you probably all know, there was a heat wave. That first week of June, we expected 70-degree days, and they were all in the 90s, and it was hot. And of course, the drought and the river was going down. So I write about in my latest book, which will be out probably at sometime later in November, the harrowing experience of paddling in a river that was going down and down and down. And so that's the fourth Paddle Pilgrim book. And as long as I'm advertising my books, they're all on my website. I've also written a book which just came out about 2 months ago, which is a children's book called Grizz and His Friends. And it's a story of a group of animals that live in the mountains here in Washington State. And these were stories I told to my 5 kids and now 5 grandkids as they were growing up to help them go to sleep at night when they weren't interested in going to sleep. So if folks are looking for some early Christmas shopping, my books are available at Amazon, and there's more information on them at my website at paddle-pilgrim.com.
Okay, thank you. I asked about the duration just in case any of my kids or grandkids get the wild idea to try. It's a big time commitment. Anyway, a question from Nancy Olson. How
Yeah.
did you make connections with people to help you along the way? I was very moved by this. I had the same emotions when connecting with relatives on the family farms in the Hardanger area.
Well, I'm fortunate that I had a great aunt who did, long before there were online services and genealogical resources. She had done all of the homework in the old school way with, church records and, all of that stuff that took a lot of letter writing. So I had a lot of good information. I knew where I was going to go, but I didn't contact the folks. So, it was kind of one of those serendipitous experiences where you go and we actually were riding electric bicycles on an old trolley track out from Granvin to Nesheim, which is on the direction going toward Voss. And I asked a person along the way, a lady was working in her garden, and I said, I'm looking for the Nesheims. And she said, oh yeah, well, just up the road in the yellow house. You need to look up there because he's kind of the historian for the area. And so we headed up the hill, and I shouted, he was up on the deck doing something, and he said, I said, I'm a Nesheim. And he said, oh, well, come on up. And so it literally happened on the spot. And he brought out the family book and found great grandfather Johannes's name coming to America in 1849. And we, of course, had some coffee and some cookies and some apple juice because the Hardanger Fjord has a lot of orchards. And so there was fresh apple juice. And so that was the area where my, at least the Nesheim, my grandmother's family, came from.
Okay, here's a comment from Karen Weiberg. My great-grandfather was from Balestrand, the second son. No land for him, so off to America. Family name is Bala or Bale, B-A-L-E. And I need a relative when we go to the cemetery to know who is an actual relative, I guess, buried in the cemetery.
Well, I love to, this may sound a little strange, but I love to wander through cemeteries. And whenever there would be a church, I would wander through the cemeteries and just look at the names. And one of the things I write about in my book, in which I really felt blessed by, was very often at the base of the headstones in the cemetery was just that wonderful little word, T-A-K-K, talk. And of course, we all know that means thank you. And at first I thought, well, this is a lovely thing. The sort of the final thought or the final words of a person as they leave this life. Thank you for the life I've had. I then discovered that that was a very common final message. And of course, the variations with Tusen Tak and Munga Tak and Jerkla Tak and Tak for Alt. The Norwegians seem, at least as their lives are ending, to be a rather grateful people. And I saw that. So I think it's really worth exploring the cemeteries and the little churches in the countryside and seeing these the holy ground that surrounds these churches.
Okay, next another comment from Herb Nelson. Surely a prayerful visit in Little St. Olaf Kirke gave you safe journey to Vic. So he's giving credit there.
Well, you know, it's interesting. That's a lovely little church, and it's actually a faux or a false Stav church. It's designed with some of the kind of architectural features of a Stav church. And the story behind that church, I'll tell very quickly. There was an English woman, Margaret, who had come to climb the mountains in the 19th century in the area, and she met a young Norwegian man named Knut Kvikne, and Knut and she fell in love, and he said to her, let's get married and you can move to Norway. And she was a strong English woman, and she said, well, no, well, perhaps if you build a church for me here in which they speak English, I will marry you and move to Norway. And so that's the story behind the St. Olaf Kirke. And to this day, they have services in English. So we were able to go to their evensong or their evening service and worship there. And I was able to say my prayers. And in fact, our prayers were answered as we went across the fjord.
Okay, and just a couple comments here from Trena. Your film has encouraged my hope to paddle the Hardanger to our family ancestral farm near Åker. The time has come, your letter to ancestors found home in my heart. And then another comment from Sue Erickson. My daughter and grandson paddled the Mississippi River this summer, but had to start in St. Paul and go south because of the drought in the north and low water in Itasca. So
yeah, we were able to paddle. We actually could not launch at Itasca because the water was so low. So we drove down to near Bemidji, and that's where the lakes start, Lake Irving, and of course Lake Bemidji, and then you have Cass and the Winnebagoshus. And so we had to actually launch by Bemidji because the river was so low.
Okay, from Mary Jo Thorsheim, is there a way to contact the artist on your adventure? I would like to get in touch with her about my Norway art business and to share thoughts. Tak, Munga Tak.
Yeah, absolutely. The woman's name is Ellen McDonough, McDonah, and she has a website. So if you go and search Ellen McDonough, McDonah. Her Norwegian name, I don't think she has this on her website, is Kolbo, Kolbo. And she has, I'm sure she would be delighted to talk with you and to share her resources and what she's learned. She was, as I said in the film, the first woman to solo the whole Mississippi River. She's also soloed the whole Missouri River, which is actually longer than the Mississippi. She's a cancer survivor. and one tough Norwegian. She's I call her my paddle sister. So I encourage you to reach out to Ellen. And if you have any difficulty reaching her, feel free to email me. My email address is paddlepilgrim@gmail.com. Paddlepilgrim@gmail.com.
Okay, we're getting a little short on time, but one last comment from Mary Jo Thorsheim. She says, I've been there and have original Hans dolls in my Norway art business in Minneapolis.
Oh,
Some
my.
info on Norwegian American columns I have written for the Norwegian American, I goofed up here, Norwegian American newspaper. She writes columns for that. And then she agrees with you. Wasn't he, Hans Dahl, a wonderful artist? Also worked with Björg Bjorberg, interviewed by Rich Steve. So that's the last in the chat box here.
Well, it has been a delight to be with you all. And like I say, feel free to email me at paddlepilgrim@gmail.com if you have other questions or other thoughts. One of the things that I sometimes do is if folks want autographed copies of my books, I'm happy to send them autographed copies, and I'll write personal notes to grandchildren or nieces and nephews or others. And with Christmas just ahead, I'm happy to do that. So feel free to email me at paddlepilgrim@gmail.com. And of course, look at my website with more information on my books and my films. The film you saw today is on my website, so you can watch it, you can share it with other people. And again, Tusen Talk, this has been a delightful morning with you.
Okay, well, I'm signing off, but I'll turn it back over to Marilyn Sorensen.